The following podcast is taken from a live broadcast on Inspire FM.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Book Club show on Inspire 105.1 FM. My name is Imrana Mahmood and it is the 17th of December. It's just 5:10. Today's show, we basically called it Book Club Wrapped, and yes, we've taken it from a very trendy social media, which everyone will kind of follow, especially if you're on platforms Spotify. Wrapped has kind of inspired it. So I thought, actually, why not do that? Why not go through the kind of year that we've had in terms of some of the books we've read, some of the books I've spoken about on the show, and hopefully over the year, you've kind of been inspired to maybe pick up a particular book that we've discussed on the show, or perhaps there's a book that you've already read that we covered on the show, and you've kind of heard different people's kind of thoughts and perspectives on that. And of course, because we are going to then be heading into 2025, I would love any book recommendations that you might have. So you can please send them on, you can call in to the studio or even on WhatsApp. So the numbers are 01582481822 or 07779481822. I'm always really pleased to hear and hear from people in terms of the book recommendations, and I will definitely try to feature them on the show. And even maybe reach out to some of the authors. Obviously, it's always a pleasure being able to interview different writers and authors about their books. So on today's show, like I said, we're just going to be covering kind of a book club wrapped of 2024. And if you've been tuning in regularly, there's been a complete kind of a whole spectrum of genres of books that we've covered on the show. Obviously, the past couple of years, I've been trying my best to have a really lovely Ramadan program. So we'll kind of do a little bit of throwback of some of the books that we covered during Ramadan as well. But of course, because of the ongoing genocide at the moment in Palestine, I definitely want to dedicate quite a bit of the show to Palestinian writers. Like I've said in previous shows as well, it's so important that we continue to amplify the Palestinian writers, Palestinian voices, and just to keep, I guess, some of the media on, the attention on that, because it is obviously very easy to kind of lose, I guess, the momentum when it comes to these things, especially when you aren't obviously in the country itself, or as, for example, non-Palestinians, what way is it that we can show our solidarity? So I thought maybe what a good way to do it, is just for this show to go through some of the books that we have covered. And the first one I'm going to kind of share is a book that I talked about back in May. So I won't necessarily go in order all the way from kind of January to December, because obviously that would take quite a while, but I'm going to cover as many as I can in today's show. So we're going to start off with Mahmoud Darwish's A River Dies of Thirst. So this was a collection of both kind of prose and poetry. So for those of you who might not know, so Mahmoud Darwish is basically a very, 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 very well-known poet, academic, writer. So he was a celebrated third poet in the Arab world. He was born in the village of Al-Bawra in Galilee, Palestine in 1941. His family fled to Lebanon in 1948 when the Israeli army destroyed their village, returning secretly to the newly created state of Israel after a year. He worked as a journalist and editor in Haifa and left to study in Moscow in 1970. His exilic journey took him to Cairo, Beirut, Tunis, Paris, Amman and Ramallah, where he settled in 1995. Darwish published more than 30 collections of poetry and prose, which have been translated into 35 languages. Among his many international awards were the Lenin Peace Prize, the French Medal of Knight of Arts and Letters, and the Lannan Foundation Prize for Cultural Freedom. So basically, the blurb of this particular book, so this is one of the kind of latest collections that you're able to purchase. So the blurb says Mahmoud Darwish was often cited as a poetic voice of the Palestinian people. In the summer of 2006, as Israel attacked Gaza and Lebanon, Darwish recorded his observations and feelings in poems, meditations, fragments, and journal entries. The result is this remarkable collection, his last to come out in Arabic. At once lyrical and philosophical, questioning and wise, full of irony, resistance and play, Darwish's musings on unrest and loss dwell on love and humanity. In these pages, myth and dream are inseparable from truth. So that's a really wonderful blurb to this book, A River Dies of Thirst. It's been published by Saki Books. Now, back in May, obviously, I shared some of the poems and writings from this particular book. So we'll spend a few moments to do the same, and then we'll go through some of the other books that we covered on the show in 2024. So one of these I'm going to share now from A River Dies of Thirst is I Walked on My Heart. I walked on my heart as if my heart were a road or a pavement or air, and my heart said, I have tired of identifying with things when space has broken into pieces, and have tired of your question, where shall we go when there's no land there and no sky, and you obey me? Give me an order, direct me to do what you want. So I said to my heart, I have forgotten you since we set off with you as my reason, and me, the one speaking, rebel against me as much as you can, and run, for there's nothing behind us except what's behind. So that is I Walked on My Heart by Mahmoud Darwish. So I'm going to read a couple of others. So this one is called On Nothingness. It is nothingness leading us to nothing. We gaze at nothingness searching for its meaning, and we're stripped of nothingness by something resembling nothingness, and miss the absurdity of nothingness, for it is more attractive than something that makes us into things. The slave loves an oppressor, because venerating nothingness is an idol defies it and he hates it. If his awe encounters something he thinks is visible and ordinary, so the slave loves a tyrant like him, appearing from another nothing. Thus nothingness is begotten by another nothing. What is this nothingness? Master of reinvention, multifaceted, tyrannical, overruling, impetuous, a joker. What is this nothingness? Perhaps it is a spiritual illness or a hidden energy, or perhaps a satirist experiencing in describing our condition. There's also in this book A River Dies of Thirst. Like I said, it's like it explains in the blurb a mixture or a mix of kind of poems and also kind of almost just observations that he made. So not necessarily like diary entries, but obviously we can't even imagine, I guess, what it would be to live in a place where your people are being ethnically cleansed, and you and your family have been displaced and having to move from home to home. So obviously there's a really I think intriguing mix. So even if maybe sometimes you're not sure if you kind of want to pick up a poetry book, books like these where you have kind of a mix of both prose and poetry is a really good place to start. So for example, this is a piece which is called A Shawl Made of Silk. A shawl on a tree branch. A girl has passed by here, or the wind, and hung her shawl on the tree. This is not a piece of information, but the opening of a poem by a poet who is at ease, and who no longer suffers from love, so he's begun to view it, from a distance, like a beautiful pastoral scene. He has put himself in the scene. The willow tree is tall, the shawl made of silk. This indicates that the girl used to meet her boy in the summer. They would sit on the grass. It also means they used to lure birds to a secret wedding, for the broad horizon in front of them on this hill is attractive to birds. Perhaps he said to her, I long for you when you are with me, as if you were far away. And perhaps she said to him, I embrace you when you are far away. Perhaps he said to her, I melt at your glances and become music. And then the piece continues, and it's got a really kind of wonderful ending. The poet becomes increasingly involved in describing the silk shawl, not noticing that it is a cloud that happens to be passing between the branches of the tree at sunset. So literally on the next page, there's another kind of piece of prose. This one is called A Sort of Loss. I climb up from this valley, making my own way unaided. I climb a steep hill to see the sea. I'm not borne along by a song or a misunderstanding with the essence of things. I amuse myself by dodging my shadow and thinking cheerfully about where a rainbow ends, and this distracts me suddenly from my shadow, which has become entangled in a thorn bush and is injured by not bleeding. I bend down to help free it and get pricked by a thorn. I imagine, to begin with, that the drop of blood on my hand is a reflection of one of the colours of the rainbow. But a slight pain in my hand makes me aware that what the sunlight does with a body of airborne moisture is something else. I bind my trifling injury with a paper handkerchief and continue climbing the steep hill to see the sea. But the clouds grow thicker and cover the low ground and the outlying areas and the sea, which has been taken prisoner in one of the walls. Night falls, and the lights of the settlements appear on all sides. When I descend the steep hill into the valley, making my own way unaided, I remember I have left my shadow hanging on a thorn bush. I don't know if I'm sad or not, as a literary loss such as this is not worth recording. I say, tomorrow I will climb a higher hill to see the sea beyond the settlements, but I will strap my shadow to me so I don't lose it again. So that's such a poignant kind of piece. That one was called A Sort of Loss. The fact that it's obviously a kind of reflection on the fact that, again, even if you haven't, the fact that Palestinians have been displaced, and then not only have they lost their homes, they're also having to view the kind of illegal settlements around them, and even wanting to see something as beautiful as the ocean and just to admire the land that they live in. They can't even do that. And, this idea of the shadow, and obviously kind of makes you think of something which is kind of lost in the dark, I guess. That was quite, definitely one to kind of think about. So I'll share maybe one more from this book. So the one that I'm discussing is a book that was featured on the show back in May. So this is A River Dies of Thirst by Mahmoud Darwish. So maybe I will read kind of two short poems, and then we'll move on to our next book. So this one is called High is the Mountain. He walks on clouds in his dreams and sees the unseen. He thinks the clouds are dry land. High is the mountain. Higher and further. Nothing reminds him of nowhere, so he walks with his misgivings, walks and does not arrive. As if he is he, or one of the attributes of I, that the two opposites, hope and despair, have divided between themselves. The mist was thick in his poem. He was rising up from my dream, so I said to him, High is the mountain. So again, this idea, I think, of nature, the fact that, it's talking about, the start of the poem, he walks on clouds in his dreams. And again, there's that kind of maybe a sense of escapism. There's this, the poet mentions the kind of two opposites, hope and despair. And I think, in such a dire circumstance, where you are having to witness complete death and destruction around you, how do we hold on to hope, even though we're falling into what feels like, a sense of despair. It's such a important part, I think, a part, especially as Muslims, as part of our faith, to always be hopeful and remain hopeful. And, it becomes even a kind of a bold act of worship. And it's so important that we are able to always remain optimistic and have faith in Allah, and Allah, He is the best of planners. So regardless of the horrors that we are witnessing at the moment, and not just in Palestine, in so many other countries that have been impacted, by ongoing kind of imperialism. It is important that we do look to a future, and also I think do what we can in our own spheres as well, in our own circles of influence. And sometimes things can feel really, really overwhelming, especially in an age of social media where we are always seeing the kind of horrific things that are happening, not just in other countries, even kind of in the UK, and it's so sad. The things that we witness in terms of poverty, in terms of those kind of homelessness, and there are so many issues, and it is easy to become kind of overwhelmed. But I think having hope during those times of despair becomes really an important thing to be able to hold on to. So that was a very quick kind of sharing of A River Dies of Thirst by Mahmoud Darwish. So that part of today's show, which is called Book Club Wrapped 2024, we're jumping on the social media trend of Spotify because obviously it's something that they do. If you do have that platform, every year they kind of basically share, depending on what kind of music and things you've been listening to, like your top tracks and your top listening and your top artist and all these various things. And so we kind of just thought it would be a bit of fun to kind of jump on that trend and do that for book club and all the books we've read this year. So another book, what might be good is actually just, we've got about 5 minutes before the show, is to go revisit some of the books that we discussed during Ramadan, because the next Ramadan 2025 is not too far away. It's like I'm sure it's like under 3 months now, right? Because I think Ramadan is due to start right at the start of March. So inshallah, may Allah allow us to reach another Ramadan. But Ramadan last year, I had an absolute pleasure of being able to interview 5 different writers and authors to cover the month of Ramadan, and it's become such a special thing for me actually to be able to reach out to authors and to feature different books and be able to feature these interviews during Ramadan, inshallah, as a kind of an intention of kind of a spiritual just to be kind of spiritually uplifting, I think, during the month, because alhamdulillah, I think Allah allows us the path to come closer to Him. We just need to make that intention. Ramadan is always a really beautiful time. So there were 5 books that I featured in Ramadan. So there was The Power of Dua by Ali Imrana. There was Ramadan Mubarak by Tariq Hussain. These Olive Trees with Aya Raname, Sophia's War with Hiba Nur Khan, and also Seeing for Ourselves with Suhaima Manzoor Khan. So that was, I have to say, without blowing my own trumpet, a really fantastic kind of lineup of guests that we had in the Ramadan show. And, it was so wonderful to be able to have both kind of a mix of books for adults and also for children. So the 2 books that were aimed at kind of younger readers was These Olive Trees with Aya Raname and Sophia's War with Hiba Nur Khan. And obviously These Olive Trees is written by a Palestinian writer, and it was kind of a book definitely aimed at much kind of younger readers. So maybe I'd say between like 5 years, 7 years old, would be a really lovely read. It's one of those books so that no matter what I think the age is, you could kind of sit down and read it with your child. And actually the most beautiful thing about that book was the illustrations. They were so it was really lovely and colourful, and when you think about the colours of Palestine, it was really great in the way that was kind of shared. And it was a really beautiful read. It was, I felt like an absolute privilege to be able to interview the author Aya Raname. And again, I think it's such an important thing that young children, how do we share with them the information about what is going on in Palestine, because obviously it's so difficult to be able to talk to them about difficult subjects. And I think being able to share a children's book, share a story from a child's perspective is sometimes a really gentle way to kind of introduce them to that and have those conversations. So we're heading to a break now. We'll kind of talk a little bit more about some of the books that were covered in Ramadan this year as part of today's book club show Wrapped. So I'll be back in a few moments. Please do grab yourselves a cup of tea and maybe some cookies if you like, and we'll be back in a few moments. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum, this is Atif Nawaz. Listen to Inspire FM shows in your time by heading over to inspirefm.org or listen on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Book Club show on Inspire 105.1 FM. My name is Imrana Mahmood, and on today's show we are covering Book Club Wrapped 2024. So I'm going to be doing kind of basically a throwback to some of the books that we've discussed on the show throughout the year. So hopefully you've kind of been tuning in regularly, so you already know. But if you might have missed some, hopefully that'll be an opportunity to add some more to your list. And like I said, in the first half of the show, we are coming up to the holidays where we're going to, inshallah, have time to kind of rest and recover and make time for reading. And I definitely recommend, if you have maybe struggled this year to kind of pick up a book or get into reading, holidays, yes, they're busy because obviously we're spending more time, with family, but even if you kind of commit to 5 minutes a day, I think just pick up a particular book, and it doesn't have to be a massive novel. It can be anything. It could be a poetry book, it could be a book of short stories, it could be a children's book, and actually children's books are absolutely wonderful as a starting point even for adults. I would say please make some time, and inshallah in 2025, who knows, you might become an absolute fantastic bookworm, and you will never look back and you'll be so thankful. And I know that so many of us find it easy now in the age of social media just to kind of be constantly on different social media apps and just kind of be scrolling through, and before you know it, it's been an hour, maybe it's been 2 hours, God knows, maybe it's been longer, and you've kind of almost really I guess I don't want to call it a waste of time. I mean, I'm sure that there's so much stuff that is of benefit in social media as well. But, being able to pick up a good book is really, really amazing and transports you into different kind of time zones, into different places, and again, we hope that while we are reading and we're literally putting ourselves in other people's shoes and into, trying to imagine other people's circumstances, that's able to create, empathy and, and at the end of the day, the intention behind the book club show and Inspire FM was also always the fact that, Iqra was the first revelation to the Prophet ﷺ, and, it's such an important I think to hold on to the fact that, Allah's first command was to read, or it was to recite. And, scholars and teachers, they've just in that one, word of being able to create so much tafsir and so much depth in the fact that, it of course it can mean recite the Quran, but it's also about seeking knowledge. And when we talk about things like seeking knowledge, what do we mean? And, and I think sometimes there tends to be a lot of emphasis. And I think, in certain circumstances, rightly so, on Islamic knowledge, learning and studying the Quran, studying the Hadith, understanding the fiqh of different, topics within, our deen. It's so important to have that knowledge and to be able to practice it in a way which is the closest to how the Prophet ﷺ, practiced it. So all of those things, of course, are really, really important. But, at the same time, our teachers also tell us that, and we know this, that the Prophet ﷺ received revelation, when he was 40 years old, and, he'd already lived so much of his life. And that's why we say, is to study his character, to understand the type of man that he was, the type of person that he was. It's really important because it does come down to, our character and the way we are and the way that we, I think the way we carry ourselves, the way we speak to others. And I think it's a good reminder. So yeah, just coming, I guess, back to the point that we want to read and we want to be able to seek knowledge, but when it comes to character and embodying the character of the Prophet ﷺ, we need to be able to look to role models, but also kind of almost reflect deeply within ourselves. And even, for example, if you are on social media, there were a lot of people sharing yesterday the killing of Khalid Nabhan. So he was a grandfather who very early on, when the news started coming out of Palestine last year, he had lost his basically his grandchildren. There was an image of him holding on to his granddaughter, and who'd been killed, and he's just hugging her, and it's just the amount of love that is flowing out from him in that moment, but also this beautiful patience. And we know that it's from our deen, to when you have patience, to have beautiful patience, and the way he's hugging her, and he kisses her eyes, and he there's even a video from last year where he's kind of brushing her hair, and obviously she's died, but he's got this constant smile on his face. And so many people were sharing this on social media yesterday, the fact that even within that profound grief, and the well-known kind of that everyone started sharing, kind of across the globe, with his words that, his granddaughter Reem was the soul of my soul. Basically meaning because she was the daughter of my daughter, and he encapsulated so much, I think, beauty and love and compassion within those few words. So to have heard the news that he was killed yesterday, and it's completely devastating. But I think what was also very comforting and to kind of see is the way I think he carried himself within the past year. The fact that there were countless videos of him like buying toys for children, gifting children toys. He was feeding stray cats. He was helping people in hospital and helping the injured. And I think there's so many of us, when we suffer some sort of loss, I think we can become actually quite, naturally, we would kind of fall into despair, and all that maybe comes out of our mouth is like complaint after complaint. But for a personality like Khalid Nabhan, the way he carried himself, I think he really did embody, I would say, so many characteristics, prophetic characteristics, which we should be able to learn from, inshallah. So that's the reason on today's show we're doing the book club wrapped, but I really want to definitely also focus on some of the kind of Palestinian writers and Palestinian stories as well. So in the first half of the show we spoke a little bit about A River Dives of Thirst by Mahmoud Darwish, and I was just starting to introduce a book that part of the Ramadan series that I did, because obviously I had the pleasure of being able to interview many different authors. So one of them was Alia Rayyan, and so she had written a book called The Power of Dua, and we also had the pleasure, actually, for those of you who might listen to the show regularly, I also run a women's only book club in Luton, and we had the pleasure of being joined by Alia Moran. We had like an online book club session with her to talk about this book. So Alia Moran reverted to Islam in 1999 as a young woman, has been involved in the UK Dawah for over 20 years. In 2010, she founded a Solace UK charity that helps women who have reverted to Islam and find themselves in difficulty. In 2019, she launched a YouTube show called Honest Tea Talk. So it's quite a well-known kind of show that you can watch, and it's absolutely brilliant. Now, this book, The Power of Dua, I mean, it was such a profound read. I think it really transformed my relationship of how I think about dua and how I think about my conversations that I have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because I think, again, we sometimes maybe fall into a habit where, we're kind of just praying, and we're praying quickly, and then we want to do dua, and we're just trying to get through our list of du'as that maybe we usually make. Maybe we've learned some certain Arabic du'as, and they kind of just roll off our tongue, right? Because we're so used to, saying them. But how present are we in our du'a? And I think this book really, really made me. I think it altered my, kind of thinking about that, which I think is such a is a profound thing. So even kind of, for example, in the introduction, the author says, "Dearest reader, although your eyes are reading these words, I ask that you grant me your heart's attention. You may be wondering why I have started this introduction with dearest reader. Whether I know you or not, it is because introductions are everything, as you will come to see. I want you to understand that you are a reader who is dear to me, regardless of our differences in gender, race, age, and even religion. You are dear to me because you and I are more similar than you realize. How? Because we are trying to make a sense of this journey called life, and we're doing the best that we can to navigate our way through." So that's kind of how the introduction starts off. But I think, one of the most beautiful things, for example, is in part 1, where it says Dua of need and want. "Dear reader, there are moments in your life where you will find yourself at an all-time low as a servant of Allah in need. There are moments in your life where you will find yourself in a better place, where you can dream as a servant in want. I invite you to embark upon beginning of this journey of dua, discovery, by introducing you to the one to whom you are making dua. I introduce you to dua through knowing your Lord." And kind of almost the first chapter of that is dua in relationships. Ali Umrian talks about our relationship with dua, but then also with Allah as well. And the fact that in Surah Baqarah it says that if my servants ask you about me, I am very close, answering the caller who invokes me. So this reminder from Allah that Allah is there and He's waiting for us to ask Him. And it's almost like having this friend, this really, really near friend who is willing to listen to us and wants to give to us. And I think sometimes, we do sometimes forget that. And I think it's really important that, and I think that's what this book does beautifully. It not only gives you kind of the practical ways that you should maybe be present in your dua, but also in a spiritual sense as well, that, where do we find ourselves in certain situations and how are we feeling? And in those moments, how do we converse with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So this book, The Power of Dua, it was really wonderful to be able to speak to Alia Umrian, talk about this book, and it really is, this book in itself is a really beautiful companion to have during Ramadan. So if you don't have your own copy, I would suggest, like we said, that Ramadan is literally just around the corner. We should, we know about the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. They used to start preparing for Ramadan, even kind of, I think, even 6 months in advance. So like one Ramadan would end, and a short while later, they would start thinking about the next Ramadan. So definitely prepare. I would recommend getting a copy of this book. And it's something that you can read, a little bit every day. For example, part 2, it says before dua. "Dear reader, before your lips part and you make dua to the Lord of the worlds, for all that your heart yearns for, prepare your heart. For it is the heart that must speak to Allah before the utterance of words. Your heart must know to whom you are speaking. Your heart must be certain, expecting the absolute best response. Your heart must be prepared to be presented to your Rabb before your words. I invite you to commit yourself to strengthening the state of your heart and soul, which will transform your dua and your relationship with Allah." So those are the kind of the way that the first part, different parts, kind of begin to each section of the book. And I think each time, like I said, it's kind of inviting you to really think very deeply, but also they kind of almost give you the tips and the tools to be able to make sure that you can kind of really perfect your dua almost. So. Definitely this is a wonderful book. So as part of Spotify Wrapped, I said that I would discuss some of the books that we covered over 2024. So just before we headed the break, I started talking a little bit about These Olive Trees by Aya Ghaname. This is a children's book. It's obviously looking at a child's perspective of being in Palestine, kind of experiencing displacement. And it definitely is something that for younger readers, if you want to share what's going on in a way that children are able to understand, I would definitely recommend this book. It's got beautiful illustrations and colors, but also the fact that it's such a difficult topic. When we talk about things like displacement and death, and but this, it does it in a very subtle way for young readers, and I think the illustrations also indicate that. But ultimately, the focus of the book is the olive trees and the land, our relationship with the land, and especially as Indigenous peoples, what does that mean for us? And even if we're, for example, we're non-Palestinians. I mean, those of us who, for example, are South Asian, who maybe our families come from countries like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, who experienced, our families experienced partition. And the fact that is kind of a legacy of kind of the British Empire. We know our families and our histories, they are part of this. We understand what displacement is, we understand what it means, we understand what it feels and what it meant for our families to be uprooted. And why are we, as Pakistanis, Indians, Bangladeshis, why are we even in the UK, right? And it's because, once upon a time, the people of this country had gone to our countries to colonize and to, kind of spread imperialism. And there is so much shared history when we talk about British history. But yeah, so just coming back to the idea, that relationship we have with our own land. And for example, my family's from Pakistan. We used to go back to Pakistan very often to kind of meet family and go for a holiday. And, I definitely over time, I always loved and enjoyed going to Pakistan, but the kind of, I sense, I think, of closeness that I have with Pakistan now, it almost feels a bit stronger now, because I understand how important it is for me personally to hold on to my heritage, to hold on to my culture, and to really understand, what that means for me as a person. How does that play in my, into my life? And it's something, really important that we always sense that. But I think from a Palestinian perspective, there's so much conversation around olive trees, around cultivating the land, especially when that land's being stolen. How do you hold on to that hope, and how do you hold on to that relationship with your land? And obviously the idea of planting trees and planting trees that maybe you in your own lifetime might never be able to see, but being able to plant those seeds for the future generation is kind of the message in a way of this book, These Olive Trees by Aya Ghaname. So These Olive Trees is another book that I covered back in March 2024 as part of the Ramadan series. And the other children's book that I was going to quickly mention was Sophia's War by Hiba Nurhan. So this is a historical fiction. Again, it's a novel aimed at children, but as an adult, I absolutely loved reading it. It was, Hiba Nurhan is an amazing writer. She writes in such a descriptive way, which really engages you. You're really able to transport yourself into the time that she's speaking about. Now, this book specifically, Sophia's War, is about a family a Muslim family in France that helped Jewish people during the war, to protect them from kind of Nazis and what they were doing. And it's based on a true story. For example, there's a quote at the beginning of the book by a different author, because you get kind of different recommendations, and it says war is an important and much needed Second World War story that puts a spotlight on a rarely heard part of history. Sophia's story is a must-read in schools, exploring the Second World War to encourage empathy. The story is superbly told with adorable characters, a special heartfelt book that I'm glad exists. So that was a quote of the book by A.M. Dasu, who's another writer. And it is so important. For example, literally the first chapter of the book, the first sentence is, It is only in holy places of worship and libraries that you have to whisper, for they are both sacred in their own special ways. And, I remember just reading that opening sentence and thinking, this is going to be a really, really special book, because subhanAllah, to be able to make that link between reading and libraries, a place where you're able to learn and kind of share knowledge, and to link it to the idea of a place of worship and how both are such sacred sacred places in their own right is absolutely true. So yeah, and this book, it talks about the way in which the main protagonist, Sophia, how her father and family help Jewish families during the war, and they're able to help them to get to safety, and how Sophia herself helps in that effort even as a young person, and all the dangers that are associated with it, but also the intention of knowing that actually we want to uphold justice, we want to care for others even if they are of a different faith, even if they are of a different ethnicity, culture, whatever it may be. And that is one of the most beautiful kind of, not only just a beautiful message, but, like the quote that I just read by A.M. Dasu, the fact that these are stories we don't hear of when we are in school, when we are growing up. Like, this is the first time that I actually even knew that this was the case, that there were a family, or there was a particular family, let's say in this context, that had put so much effort, put their own lives in danger in order to help kind of Jewish families, reach safety and keep them safe. And, and we don't learn about these stories, and it's important that we do. So Sophia's War, in that regard is really important book. If you are able to, like I said, you can read it for yourselves, or, even for your children. And there are some really wonderful quotes, from the book, which is really, really important. And so I would say that, if you're already thinking maybe of Eid gifts, this should definitely be, one that you can kind of feature and think about having as well. So that is Sophia's War by Hiba Nurhan. And another quote I'm just going to share is, "Resistance is a duty upon all of us now. If it costs me my life or freedom, so be it. I'll be at peace knowing I did everything in my power to resist, to fight for what is right." So that, I think, is a really good kind of kind of good quote to share for that particular book. Now, another book that I covered back in the Ramadan series, some of the other books. So we discussed The Power of the Arba Ali Imran, These Olive Trees by Aya Ghanimeh, and Sophia's War by Hiba Nurhan. The other two books were Ramadan Mubarak, which is a small, cute little gift book by Tariq Hussain. So it's got kind of full of different quotes and different kind of sayings by different kind of saints and scholars. So, really wonderful book just to dip in and out of. And the other book that was featured during Ramadan earlier this year, was Seeing for Ourselves with Sahima Mansour Khan. So, it was really wonderful. And inshallah, I'm looking forward to planning the next Ramadan series. So, hopefully we'll be sharing early next year who we will have on the show. So you must keep a lookout for that. So other than that, some of the other books that were featured on the book club show this year, because obviously this show is called Book Club Wrapped 2024. I interviewed Shahid Mahnavi, who's a Palestinian poet, and she had released a debut book called White Shoes. So you must follow her if you can on Instagram, and she's always sharing some of her beautiful poetry. And again, if you're not quite sure, you're kind of struggling to get into reading, it's always a really great way of kind of still being connected to writers and authors and books, is just to follow them, follow their work online, see what they're doing, see what they're writing and what they're sharing. And that's always a lovely way to kind of stay connected. The other kind of big, I guess, feature that we had on the show this year was in the run-up to the Dar Amana Book Club 10-year anniversary, which was celebrated in September. So we featured the 3430 list by Tasneem Abdul Rashid, and also the Treasury of Aisha author, who is Safia Rahman. There's a couple of books that we talked about, which was Gathering, Women of Colour on Nature. So it was really great to have these guests. And we also had Sami Aziz, who is the founder of the Diverse Bookshelf podcast. So again, a brilliant way to follow, listen to the Diverse Bookshelf podcast, for example. Samia does a wonderful job of interviewing authors and about books. And it's a really brilliant way to introduce yourself to books that maybe you wouldn't normally read. So definitely that is one way to do it as well. Listen to different podcasts and different interviews online, and that, might kind of kickstart something in terms of your kind of inspiration to what to read next. So those were some of the books that we kind of spoke about in 2024. I'm obviously really looking forward to what 2025 will bring. Like I said, send in any suggestions you have on 01582481822 or 0777 481 and one particular or two particular books that I would definitely feature next year will be Daybreak in Gaza. So these are stories of Palestinian lives and culture. And also If I Must Die by Rifat Al-Arir, who was martyred in Palestine as well. So we will definitely continue featuring Palestinian writers and authors, but please do send me any recommendations that you have. And I'll try my best to cover them on the show, maybe try to interview the authors and writers that you enjoy as well. But in the meantime, I hope that you have a wonderful, wonderful rest during the winter holidays. Please, just to take that moment to rest and recover. And in the meantime, please do keep me and my family in your du'as. Take care. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. Why not tune in to our live stream at inspirefm.org and follow and subscribe to our social media platforms at Inspire FM Luton.